Hi, class. We are on 6.4, the size and distribution of cities. So today we're going to take a look at how people understand how cities grow in terms of their size, as well as where places are located in their distribution. So 6.4, identify the different urban concepts such as hierarchy, interdependence, relative size, and spacing that are useful for explaining the distribution, size, and interaction of cities. So we're going to talk through some principles that help us understand these things, such as rank size rule, the primate city, the gravity model, and Christoller's central place theory. So for urban hierarchy, we have this lovely graph here. The previous example, or the previous objective, we looked at world cities, are also called global cities. Those are always ranked here at the top. In terms of population, those are the most urban. And then down here at the hamlet level, we have rural areas. And then also in terms of like the size, we have large and then small. And the number of settlements, we have far more hamlets than global cities, right? So different cities have different functions within the system, with larger, more influential cities landing higher on the hierarchy. So boop, up here, while cities with smaller populations and economies fall lower on the hierarchy, right down here. So models and theories were developed by geographers in order to explain the relative sizes and spatial organization of cities. So we'll be taking a look at how these networks and linkages communicate and affect each other. So rank size rule, this comes out on the test every single year. This is a model that illustrates the relationship between population distribution in cities that are interconnected in the urban hierarchy. This typically indicates somewhat even development. So keep in mind for these models and theories, this is not always the case. Rank size rule is a general rule. It's not something that is 100% always true. And we do see this in places that have some even development. So, for example, or the way that this rule works is that the population of the second largest city in that particular country is half of the population of the largest city. The population of the third largest city is 1/3 of the population of the largest city. The population of the fourth largest city is 1/4 of the population of the largest city, and so on, right? So, for example, let's say we have the largest city in a country at 1 million people. According to the rank size rule, the second largest city will be 500,000, the third largest 330,000, fourth largest 250,000, and so on. So again, these are not perfect, but these are just kind of general rules that we see happen, or common things that we see happen. So for primate cities, this is another concept. This often comes up on the exam every year. This is a model that illustrates disproportionate population distribution within a state. So if a place does not have even development or even population distribution, we do see this occur. So one particular city is extremely large in terms of population size, but also in terms of economic, cultural, and political influence. This typically indicates uneven development, right, within a country. So one example that we see here is France. Paris has 9.6 million people. And then the second largest city, Marseilles, is 1.3 million. So that's a pretty big difference. Mexico, also, Mexico City is 21.8 million, making it a meta city, callback from an earlier objective. The second largest city is Guadalajara, and that is at 5 million people. And then finally, we have something called the gravity model. This relates back to some concepts from Unit 1. So this model illustrates the spatial relationship / the amount of interaction between locations of different sizes. This includes the flows of people, trade, traffic, and communication. So this considers the distance between two locations and their relative size. So larger cities interact more often with other large cities rather than small cities. Small cities are drawn to the influence and impact of large cities. So large cities have like that gravity, that pull for that interaction. So this was something that we've talked about before We have something called distance decay. And then in terms of population, we have something called the gravity model. So New York will pool people from Indianapolis and Cincinnati. So these are smaller cities. You probably have never heard of them. Maybe you have. And they interact with New York City. Indianapolis is a little bit closer, so there'll be a little bit more interaction between New York and Indianapolis and in Cincinnati. And then between Indianapolis and Cincinnati, there is interaction since they're close to each other. But ultimately, there's going to be far more interaction between big cities, right? They have more draw, they have more pool. So finally, we have Christaller central place theory. So this is like the hexagon theory. You can kind of think of it like that. This model illustrates the hierarchical spatial patterns / order of cities and settlements. This is based on economic functions and consumer behaviors. The central place is the large city that provides the most goods and services for the surrounding areas. Smaller settlements like towns, villages, hamlets organize around the central place. So let's take a look at this. Right here we have the main area, the big city right here. Then we start to see smaller towns around it in this like hexagon kind of form. So this assures that there's no surface area left out or overlapped. And this means that within this distance here, we have enough goods and services to provide for that particular population, which is why we start to see this type of distribution where you have a large city and then you have a town nearby, and in between you do have smaller market towns and in between smaller villages. So we're going to come back to this here in just a second, or we're going to keep discussing it here. So things that this theory keeps in mind is threshold, the number of people needed to support a certain good or service. So that's just like a business decision, right? Businesses will be placed where there are people that would use and need their service. Range. This is the distance that someone is willing to travel for a good or service. So for certain goods and services, people will travel a lot further distance to get it. More basic goods, not so much. Higher order goods and services, so things that are expensive, desirable, or unique, has that much larger threshold and range. So larger threshold and also larger range. So we see these things in major cities. So let's say sports arenas, right? People will travel a longer distance to go to a professional sporting game. Specialty doctors, people will travel to see a particular doctor for a very niche, maybe health concern. Concerts and venues like that, people will travel a lot further from around that gravity, right? That pull's a lot stronger. Universities also as well. So lower order goods and services, these are inexpensive, common everyday needs. This has a much smaller threshold and range. So these are typically found in lower order locations like towns, villages, and hamlets. So keep in mind how that relates back to this concept right here, right? Global cities, regional cities, they will have like the higher order goods, whereas towns, villages, and hamlets, those will have the lower order as well. I mean, the big cities will also have that definitely as well. So coming back to this idea, we usually see things like grocery stores, hair salons, barbershops, gas stations, like those have to be everywhere. People are not going to drive, 30 minutes to go to the grocery store. They're going to want to go to a place much nearby. And then check this out, this distribution of Starbucks in Cincinnati. This is a great demonstration of threshold and range. So notice how it is spread out in a way that takes into consideration that idea of threshold and range. So that